We've really spent the last few years laser-focused on generative AI with very good reason, but perhaps it's time for us to switch focus to agentic AI. And this next session is why AI agents will change everything. And if you don't know about agentic AI, you soon will. And perhaps this is something that will become as day-to-day as generative AI is right now. And for this discussion, we have Bret Taylor. He is the co-founder and CEO of Sierra. He's also chair of the board at OpenAI. Welcome, Bret. Welcome. This is actually Bret's first Mobile World Congress, so that's particularly exciting. But before we crack on, you know what? I'm going to give a bit of a sort of CV rundown because it's an A to Z of Silicon Valley. Bret here was the co-CEO of Salesforce. He was the CTO of Facebook. He co-created Google Maps. He was the chairman of the board of Twitter before Elon Musk bought it. He's also, as I said, the chairman of the board of OpenAI. And you've decided you want to launch a new company. And you're throwing yourself headfirst into agentic AI. Why?
First, thank you for having me, and it's great to be here in Barcelona. I am more excited about large language models and this current wave of technology more than any technology I can remember, perhaps, since I discovered the internet when I was a teenager. And broadly speaking, it's one of those technologies that we were speaking a little bit backstage. While it is very overhyped right now and the word agent is used maybe too frequently in Silicon Valley, I think 10 years from now, when we look back, it will have permeated all parts of the economy. And there's not a lot of technologies like that, where you can, even while it's immature and imperfect, you can clearly see the impact it will have on customer service, on software engineering, on education, all these key parts of the economy, and essentially bringing the marginal cost of intelligence down dramatically. And I think that's just going to transform the economy. And as an entrepreneur, I just wanted to play a part in it.
I mean, I assume everyone here is probably very familiar with going onto a brand's website and you have a question about your order and you end up having a sort of chat with a Gen AI chatbot. How is agentic AI any different?
Well, if you surveyed the audience, I can't see anyone because of the lights, but if you surveyed the audience and you asked, do you like chatbots? My guess is not a single person would raise their hand. But if you ask the same audience, do you like ChatGPT? Almost everyone would raise their hand. And what's the difference between a chatbot and ChatGPT? Well, one works. One actually is delightful and empathetic and has become, I think, a part of most of our lives. And I think that most of the self-service solutions from 3 or 4 years ago, if you asked a consumer, were points of friction. They didn't actually help you get the job done. It maybe reduced the load on a call center, but it didn't help us. And I think we're in this era now where these AI solutions are actually better than the alternative. If you think, we have a lot of telecommunications companies here. If you think about someone upgrading or downgrading their plan, or heaven forbid, considering canceling their plan, or signing up for a service, you no longer need to wait on hold. You can have an AI that is multilingual and instantaneous. We work with companies like SiriusXM in the United States or ADT Home Security, where if your alarm stops working, an AI will help you fix it, and you don't need to wait for a field service team to come to your house. And what's remarkable about these agents is people actually really like them. The customer satisfaction score of our agent for Weight Watchers is 4.6 out of 5, which is higher than I would do if I were staffing the phones. And it's because it's patient, it's empathetic for their members that are on their weight loss journey. And I think that's really powerful and exciting, just because for so long, the cost of providing customer service was so high, most companies couldn't afford to let you access it as much as you want to. We're now bringing down the cost by 2 orders of magnitude, and I think it's just going to improve the consumer experience for so many brands.
With the agentic AI, you've talked about how it can have a much better personality, it can have better empathy. With agency, does it have more autonomy? Does it have the power to action, agency?
Well, the word agent does come from the word agency. And agency, fundamentally, the word agent, if you talk to a computer science researcher, is about autonomy. It essentially, you're affording the software some ability to make decisions. That's not all good, though. I mean,
Oh, no, there's some risks
hallucinations,
here,
there's
right?
a ton of risks. And, hallucinations have become a common thing. Literally, over the dinner table, over the holidays, my family was talking about ChatGPT and how they got it to say something goofy. This is, with agency comes the ability, you essentially give up some level of control. And I think the conversation around AI is, how do you put in guardrails? How do you put an agent in front of your customers and ensure that it's a brand ambassador? How do you ensure that if you're a retailer and you have a 30-day return policy, the AI doesn't get convinced by a very convincing consumer to say, you know what, 45 days
It
is
has
fine.
empathy. It's like, oh, we're getting on.
Yeah,
You can have 45.
Yeah, exactly. And there's been some sort of infamous cases. There was an airline where someone said they had a death in the family, and the chatbot hallucinated a bereavement policy and just said, your airfare's on us. These are the risks. And what's interesting is I think they're solvable. I think that if you look at the research labs like OpenAI, they're really working on very broad AI research. If you think about areas like we work in, which is customer experience, customer service, it goes from science to engineering. Because if you think about a retailer's policies, it's much more well-defined. You're not creating an AI that can generalize to every task. You're making an AI that can fix your Sonos speaker. You're making an AI that can help you upgrade your SiriusXM subscription. And as a consequence, despite the risks, we've really been able to work, actually in a lot of regulated industries and healthcare, financial services as well. And I think in general, my philosophy is don't wait for the technology to be perfect. In fact, it may never be perfect, but narrow the domain that you're working on so you can take these intractable problems and make them solvable. And you're seeing this not just in customer service. I think in software engineering, there's a great company called Cursor that a lot of our engineers to help them write code. In the legal profession, there's a company like Harvey. I've heard a lot of companies use them for contract reviews. And the theme between Sierra and Cursor and Harvey is simply, rather than trying to solve all the world's AI problems, you narrow it to a domain and say, hey, we're going to put in some practical guardrails around this AI so we can solve problems right now. And I think that's an opportunity for every company at this conference.
Where do you think we'll be when we talk about agentic AI with your customers, say, in a few years' time? Because obviously Sierra is a toddler of a company.
Yeah.
How
Adolescent.
yeah, 2 years old, I don't know, in the life cycle of a tech company, maybe.
Yeah.
How will it adapt and change? Will it have more autonomy going forwards?
Yeah, well, first I'll speak more broadly than Sierra. So in my view, there's really 3 types of agents, and I think we'll encounter them at different points in our personal and professional lives. The first is personal agents. From hopefully brands like OpenAI, Google, Apple, and others, there will be agents that help us plan a trip, like my trip out here to Mobile World Congress, or help me triage my inbox when I'm overwhelmed after a vacation. That's one class. I think it will take a while for that technology to mature because personal agents probably need to generalize to every tool everyone in this room uses, which is actually a fairly hard problem. I think there's also persona-based agents. So these are agents that write code or review contracts or maybe analyze an earnings report. And I think applied AI companies will be building these agents, and you'll essentially hire those agents if you want to anthropomorphize it to do a job in your company. And I think those will continue to evolve in more and more domains. And then finally, where we really work is I think there will be the agent singular that has your brand at the top that I think companies will think of like they think of their .com or their .co.uk or their mobile app. It's the one with your brand at the top that your customers go to for everything. And if you think about a website, say for your, for your mobile company, you could go to their website, you could read about their executive team, you could read about how their prices and plans compare with competitors. You could sign up for a plan. You could do technical support, all of the above. And I think most companies' AI's agents will actually be as significant as their website or their mobile app in terms of the percentage of interactions they have with their customers. And it wouldn't surprise me for most brands here if, in fact, if you fast forward 5 or 10 years, their AI agent is their main digital experience, which I think is kind of hard to imagine right now, but I really do think that's where the world is going.
Their main identity. Do you think the interface will change with agentic AI?
I think it will. I'm really excited. If you if you watch a sci-fi movie, all the way back to
I watch them all.
Oh, I'm sure you do. But just say 2001: A Space Odyssey, all the way through, more recent examples. When science fiction authors imagine us using computers, it's always by talking. It's rarely people typing on a keyboard, because if you imagine what technology can be, it usually melts away. The interface isn't something you have to learn, and everyone knows how to talk and type and speak. So I do think that I'm hopeful that everyone staring at their screens all the time will start to melt away as a social habit, and with the advent of conversational AI, when software can truly understand how we speak, that computers will sort of melt away and devices will kind of melt away. And I think that will be very exciting. And I think, having a few kids growing up in the age of the smartphone, I'm hopeful that they don't need to stare at a screen their entire life to engage with technology. The other thing I'm really excited about, and this is a more nuanced point, is part of the reason in our business and customer service, most people don't love customer service. It tends to be kind of a frustrating experience. You tend to have to wait on hold.
Well, you're often going to customer service because you already have a problem. So you're coming at it with an attitude.
Well, not only that, 60% of the time, if you rate your customer service experience poorly, it's because you waited on hold too long. So not only that, you already had a problem, and before you even had an opportunity to fix it, you were already angry because you were waiting on hold. Part of the reason for that is it's just expensive. So if you call up a consumer brand, typically the cost of that phone call is anywhere between $5 and even $25, depending on a lot of factors. If you take the cost of that phone call down by 2 or even 3 orders of magnitude over the next handful of years, it means that it's no longer a cost center, and it means that businesses will be able to, even businesses that are relatively low margin, can provide really high quality customer experiences. And I also think it will change the dynamics of brands. I hope that in the next Premier League game or Super Bowl, we'll see some company say, call us, here's our phone number. That would be totally not cost effective 2 years ago, but it might be 2 years from now. And I think it will just change the ways companies can engage digitally, and I think that's really exciting for just building businesses right now.
I mean, that sounds like all good things. Who doesn't want that, particularly for a business? But of course, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, but there are some jobs here that likely will be impacted, particularly maybe in customer service. How do we address that? You're going to tell me, like all positive CEOs do, that AI will create more jobs and create more opportunities.
I think the concern is both valid and real. So I will express some optimism here, but I think it is incumbent, if you're building a technology like this, you have to consider safety, you have to consider job displacement. These are all very real issues, and technology makers have a responsibility to have that conversation and not just simply deliver the technology. Let me start with a very long view, which is not exactly your question, but I think it's important to think about. If you go back to the great thinkers of maybe 100 years ago, a couple hundred years ago, whether it's Isaac Newton, Benjamin Franklin, and you described the economy of today, despite being geniuses, they probably wouldn't understand it. You'd probably spend 24 hours describing who grows the food. I don't get it, because what percentage of the economy was agrarian back then? Nearly 100%? As we've developed technology and automation, it's taken things that were scarce, like food production, and making them abundant. And it's hard when you're living in a time when something is scarce to imagine an economy where that thing is abundant. And we've done that with food, we've done that with energy, we've done that to some degree with transportation, though that's a more complicated 2 generations ago, the idea that you would have traveled across continents would have been a luxury, and now many people have. I think the idea that intelligence will go from something that's scarce to something that is abundant is hard to imagine, but I'm confident on the other side of that transition we'll have a new economy that might be as surprising to us as our economy today is to our ancestors. But it doesn't mean the transition will be easy. And I think the thing that is unique about artificial intelligence is that it is fundamentally software, notwithstanding the huge amount of chips and data centers. It's sort of funny to say that in this conference in particular, but the adoption of it is over software. ChatGPT became one of the fastest growing products of all time because you could just visit chatgpt.com. And you didn't need to wire your house for electricity or buy a new appliance. And as a consequence, I think the disruption to jobs that it impacts will be faster. And when disruption happens faster than society can reskill, it is a disruptive force. So fundamentally, I think it requires public-private partnership. I think the technology is real. I think the advancements will continue. I think as a consequence, it is a reality. So I don't think there's a world where you can pause it in the sense that it's so valuable that I think the adoption will be real. And I think it's really, I like to think of it as a culture of reskilling. We are all accountants, and we're right on the eve of Microsoft Excel being invented. And if you're still using a slide rule and your HP calculator, it's going to be a problem. But anyone can learn how to use these technologies. And I get a lot of questions from parents like, what should my kids study in this age of AI? I don't know. I really fundamentally think education is about learning how to think and learning how to learn. And with my kids, I just encourage them to use AI, just the same way we grew up using calculators and not considering if remembering those facts is fundamentally what your education was about, you're not really learning. And so I think there's a lot of unknowns. I feel incredible optimism, but I do think it's a real issue. And I think over the next decade in particular, we as a society will have to really grapple with sort of these new tools available to us and kind of redefine what our jobs are in certain places. But there's still a lot of accountants after Microsoft Excel. Right? It didn't take the job away, it just changed what the job was, and I think that will be true of many professions.
Well, I think that's a lesson for everyone. I mean, just listening to that last panel, the disruption is here even for journalists, for absolutely everyone. It's time for everyone to probably reskill, self included. Before we move on to some more sort of broader picture AI, with agentic AI, can it be accessible for smaller brands?
I think it can. Broadly speaking, I think it is easier to use and adopt AI simply because of how resilient and flexible it is. I actually was just talking I have a lot of family members who run small businesses, and one of them was saying they had a contract from a supplier and they weren't sure whether they wanted to pay for an attorney to review it, and they put it into ChatGPT, got some advice on it. Maybe it was good advice, maybe it wasn't. They probably wouldn't have hired an attorney anyway for that small contract because then it couldn't afford it. I actually think in general, AI is democratizing access to expertise, medical expertise, legal expertise, technology expertise. And as a consequence, I think it's a very democratizing force for small businesses in particular, because in general, I evaluate most purchasing decisions by talking to AI today. And so I'm actually really excited, particularly for sole proprietorships and truly small businesses as well. But I think it's a democratizing force, and I'm really excited about how accessible it is.
I mean, looking at the future of AI and how it develops, we're here in Europe. Europe is, I think there's no doubt, is lagging when it comes to artificial intelligence, both from the US and perhaps now with DeepSeek with China. As a US tech executive, do you think Europe is uncompetitive? Is it over-regulated? Are there too many taxes? These are the complaints we often hear.
Well, first, I'll start with, we talked about this backstage, but the reason I'm here today is we actually just opened an office in Soho in London. It's our first office outside the United States. So we at Sierra are incredibly excited about the market for AI in Europe, and we're very excited to have our first office outside of the United States. As you said, we're a young company, so it's a very symbolic thing for us to set up our first outpost on the other side of the Atlantic. And I think every company at this conference, every individual in Europe can really benefit from these technologies, and I think the benefits are truly global, and the benefits are truly universal. So I have incredible optimism for Europe. As it relates to regulation, it's very nuanced. I think it's very important, as I said when I talked about public-private partnership, to take into account certainly safety, but as you said, things like job displacement and other sort of aspects of it. I think the real important part with regulation is that first, it's grounded in science, but the other thing is that it's somewhat flexible because the technology is changing so rapidly. Sometimes well-intentioned regulation can sort of box in the technology in unintended ways. And as a consequence, I think it's really important to think about how can we balance regulation to ensure that the model sort of doesn't have some of the downsides that I think regulators are rightfully concerned about, but also doesn't hinder individuals and small businesses from adopting it. And I think it's an ongoing conversation with regulators, certainly here in Europe, but actually candidly across the globe. And we're seeing lots of different takes globally on it. I'm not sure there's a black and white answer to it, but I think that is the main risk and opportunity, is how do you balance it, especially when it's so hard to predict the future. And I think there's a lot of history of regulations that were very well intended, even well written, but then the technology takes a different direction and ends up with sorry for the geeky term, but an impedance mismatch. It doesn't actually end up regulating what you intended. And so I think that's the big risk right now with AI.
Do you feel the tensions between the sort of big divergence between the US and Europe, or frankly, the US and the rest of the world right now?
From the vantage point of Sierra, I don't. Certainly in sort of the geopolitical landscape, there's a lot of pretty meaningful divergences, but it's interesting as a company, at Sierra, we help consumer brands and large-scale B2B brands build AI agents for their customers. And it turns out every company in the world is interested in that conversation. And so everyone's navigating the regulation. If you're a financial services company, you don't want your AI agent to give financial advice. If you're in the healthcare industry, you don't want to give health advice. But if you're in the financial services industry and your customer gets locked out of their account and you need to help them reset their password, what a great use of an AI agent. And so there's always going to be lines where either practically or from a regulatory standpoint, in that market, an AI agent isn't an applicable solution. And that will be different in different industries, but not just globally, just across industries as well. But I think the demand is universal. And as a consequence, I don't feel it as much. And it's interesting, having spent the past this week traveling around Europe, the conversations are quite similar, actually, to the conversations I have in the United States. And it actually gives me a lot of optimism. I actually think, we joked backstage, it's 1995 and we're talking about creating your first website. That's the way I think about it. It's 2025 and we're talking about creating your first AI agent. We'll look back in 10 years and laugh at how simplistic the AI agents of today were. But I think we also, just like we look back in 1995, and probably many of you were creating your first website and your first company at the time, I think we'll have this similar level of impact, and I don't think it's going to be confined to any continent.
I really hope we all look back and we just remember that this is where we really kind of delved deep into agentic AI. It was here, right here on this stage. Now, I can't let you go without addressing the elephant in the room. You are the chair of the OpenAI board, which of course is undergoing a huge transition from a non-profit to a for-profit. It has a few critics. One's extremely vocal, Elon Musk. Is any of the criticism fair, given how the mission is changing here? Maybe not for the non-profit, but certainly for the for-profit.
Well, I'll answer your question. Let me just give a brief for the audience, just what OpenAI is, our current structure. So OpenAI is a nonprofit with a mission, and that mission is to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits humanity. One of the things that I think, if any of you have read a newspaper recently, know is the cost of developing artificial general intelligence is actually quite high. Essentially.
That's your DeepSeek.
And notwithstanding recent advancements, generally speaking, we're seeing that the investment you put into the computation, basically the training of the AI, produces logarithmically more intelligence. It's called sort of the scaling laws of AI. And despite, even with those advancements, we continue to see the investment in compute, which is a funny noun that we invented in Silicon Valley over the past 4 or 5 years. The investment in compute has continued to sort of bear fruit in terms of intelligence. And as a consequence, the conversation at OpenAI is really, how do we maintain our mission and, in fact, serve that mission more completely, but also ensure that we're setting ourselves up to be able to meet the demands of the investment we need to build artificial general intelligence. So broadly speaking, I think every criticism is fair. I think actually, as a mission-driven organization, what comes with that is a responsibility to listen to your critics. So I try not to be reflexively defensive about any criticism that comes our way, especially with a mission as important as ours. When you think about artificial general intelligence, the first thing I think about is safety and benefiting humanity. We talked about things like job displacement. I think about, if the cost of AI is prohibitively high, how can everyone in the world use it? How do you think about a digital divide? And with that, I'd say the importance of our mission comes the fact that people will criticize it, and I take that responsibility really seriously. So the thing I will tell you is, as we've been thinking about a future structure with OpenAI, which to be fair, we haven't settled on the specifics of it, whatever we do, we want to amplify that mission. And that's the bar that we're holding ourselves to.
The mission won't change.
The mission won't change, and in fact, the structure, or, as we've talked about it, will, I hope, enhance that mission. And that's the way we're thinking about it. Nothing more to share here, but I also welcome the criticism. It's not always comfortable, but I recognize that we are such an important organization. Comes with the territory.
I don't think you need to welcome Mr. Musk. I'm sure he's got plenty more to come. Thank you very much for your time. It's been such a pleasure. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. And I think this is the end of your day too. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.